Good morning. I'm not the usual guy. Our pastor is out of town on the trip to Mexico on our mission trip with the crew that's there. My name is Cochran, and I am the children's and youth minister here and get to speak today, so that's really fun. So let's pray before we get going. God, thanks so much for today, and thanks for a chance to gather together with you, with your body, and I pray that you would right now reveal yourself to us, that you would open our hearts, that your spirit would fill this place, that you would give us instruction and wisdom through your word, and that you would give us the courage to just follow through with what you ask us. It's in your son's name that we pray. Amen. Today's an interesting sermon because it's kind of about parenting, and I'm not a parent, so that makes things a little bit difficult. And also, if I were you all and I was a parent, I'd be like, I'm not listening to her. She doesn't know anything. So I decided that the best approach isn't to tell you what to do. It's just to talk about what I know, and I'm sure I don't understand parenting. Get that disclaimer out there, and so you can take it or leave it with whatever I say. I think that my only experience with any type of parenting is, of course, my own parents, and I think I had awesome parents, so maybe there's some wisdom in that hopefully we can all gain from. We're in a series called the Hall of Fame of Faith that comes from Hebrews chapter 11, and this is just a chapter in the Bible that goes through several different people's stories. And if you've read it before, you'll notice that several of the verses start with the two words, by faith. And there's a whole bunch of people listed off. It says, by faith Abel, by faith Enoch, by faith Noah, by faith Abraham, by faith Isaac, by faith Jacob. And these sentences start with saying, by faith Isaac did such and such. By faith Abraham did such and such. And we have these several people who lived lives of great faith. And that's kind of the one common thread that I thought going into this, that they all shared, that they all lived lives of faith. Going back through it, though, just in getting ready for today, I was noticing that it's kind of like a family tree. Several of the people who are listed in this chapter, it says, like, by faith Abraham, and then the next guy that's listed is his son Isaac. And the next guy that's listed is his son. The next guy is his son. And so there's kind of some family heritage here. And it made me start to wonder, I wonder if faith is kind of hereditary or something, kind of genetic, something that we can pass down from one generation to the next generation. And I'm sure we all pass certain things down. Like, I'll do some things both good and bad, and I'll be like, I did that because my dad does that. Or like, I'll pray and then I'll cry while I'm praying, and my grandfather and my dad always prayed and cried. And so I see certain things that I do that I know that my parents and my grandparents did. And so I'm starting to wonder, I wonder if faith is something that we can see in an older generation and have that passed down to us, to our kids and their kids, and so on. It certainly looks like it here. The verse that we're going to be talking about today is Hebrews chapter 11. It's verse 23. It says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. And so we're going to kind of learn a couple lessons from that verse and from Moses' parents. But as I was reading through this, I was like, all these people get named, like Abraham, Isaac, they get a shout out with their name. But poor Moses' parents, like, it doesn't even list their names. It just says, by faith, Moses' parents did something. So I went to look it up. Moses' parents are named Jochebed and Amram, which may be why they didn't mention them. But Jochebed was his mom. Amram was his dad. And I went back through kind of just learning about the story of his family, and they raised 3 children of faith, Moses and his older brother Aaron and his older sister Miriam. And the story comes from the book of Exodus, which we'll go through in a few minutes. But before we talk about Moses' family, I thought it would help to talk about my family to kind of let you know where I'm from. A lot of you know me. My name is Lara, but you might not know my parents' names, Travis and Gail. And just like Moses was a large part his parents, I'm a large part my parents. So we're going to do a little family slideshow. That's my grandma, Shirley Vidito. This is my mom's mom. Just something that I've kind of realized is there are certain parts of who I am from both my parents, but then also from my grandparents. My grandmother's side of the family, my mom's side of the family, hard workers, country people. You know, like the Turtle Man guy on YouTube? Like my cousin, that's his cousin, and they hunt turtles together. So, like, family reunions are in the garage, like big Thanksgiving feasts, like in the garage, like eating turtle. So that's kind of my mom's side of the family. Super hard workers, do whatever they can to get the job done. Interesting because my mom kind of moved out of the countryside into kind of city life, I guess, Louisville. And then kind of we still go back, and I guess we're more city folks somewhat than country, but they love us and accept us, no judgment from their family, and just a really neat group of people who love anybody. They have like calluses on their hands from working hard and hard appearances sometimes when they talk, but they're really, really kind and loving people. That's my mom's family. That's my grandma. Our family, like that side of the family, doesn't have a lot of money, so family reunions were yard sales. And we would do a yard sale every few months and see like which family unit could sell the most stuff. And that's how I grew up. This is my family in front of the house. This is my dad's side, totally different than my mom's side. Only by God did my parents, I guess, get together. My dad's side, it's like a whole bunch of people that work in churches. Ministers, music ministers, youth ministers, children's ministers. I remember a family reunion with this side of the family probably when I was 10 years old or something, and there were maybe 120 people there. And 3 or 4 pastors spoke, and all these different people had their singers up there, and they did like a choir and like hymns, and there was a children's program going on. It was like my family running a church, so that's kind of their side of the family. That top left guy is my dad. He's cute. That's my grandparents. This is an article when they were just brought into ministry. This is their 50th wedding anniversary, like a renewing vows service. So it's just raised, and that's the 2 of them, and then their 6 kids. I was just raised seeing that side of the family just to be praying people and people who had faith and who moved their family wherever God called them to go. From that side of the family, we've had missionaries in Canada and in Ukraine and in different places in Russia around the world, just from people by faith, raising their kids by faith. That's my gram, Southern cooking. That's me and my gram. This is a little embarrassing. She's teaching me piano, which I do now. That's my grandfather. Naps were like a quality thing. Throughout my family, Sunday afternoon naps are like gold. They have to happen. So learned that from my family. This is my grandpa working on a wagon. That's me. My brother was born that day. There we are. There we are again. They lived in Michigan but came to visit us all the time in Kentucky, which was good. That's my mom. She's cute. That's my mom and my dad. They got married when my mom was 19, so they were together young. All 4 of my grandparents have died, and my mom died when I was in college, so all I have left is my dad. But if my parents were still married, they would have been married like 41 years a couple of weeks ago. So they were together way long before they even had us. Cute. Cute. That's their wedding picture. Yay, me. That's us. And then my brother came along. Which is I was devastated, but I like him now. He's on the camera. That's my brother Lee. We got over it. And that's my mom and us hanging out. My mom worked during the school hours, so she was home all the time with us. Naps are continuing. Trips were important. Took a lot of trips. Playtime on the floor. My parents, I just have so many memories of them like on the floor with us, hanging out, playing. That's us on a trip. We didn't have our own hammock, so that's on vacation. getting ready for church. We went to a church where you dressed up. Here we don't quite do that. But when I was a kid, I did. There we are. Playing in the kitchen, in the drawer. That's me and my mom. Reading. That's me and my dad. Me and my brother and my dad. Not my horse. So as you can see, it's just a whole bunch of family time together growing up. My dad, he had a job working like at 5 a.m. till 8 p.m. and he worked a ton of hours. When I got in 4th grade, he was offered a huge job, something along taking care of the taxes in like a few states. I don't really understand it all, but a huge money-paying job, huge deal job, and he chose to turn it down and come and stay at home and work from home with our family. And it was like, I guess, a financial blow, but looking back, like I wouldn't have traded that for anything because I grew up with a dad coaching my sports and hanging out. I look really sleepy in that one, probably just woke up. I think this is about the end. That's him building his home office. This is learning a lesson, I'm sure. I had my own room, but I stayed in my room with my brother. My parents just like taught us to like each other because from day one I didn't really like him. But my mom was constantly like, someday y'all are going to be best friends. Someday. And so we would be like, no, but then we ended up liking each other, so it was okay. So lots of playtime together. Doing a skit, breakfast or something, family reunions, and I think that's the last one. This is all the cousins, always getting together with family and always spending time with them. Not a lot of like screen time video stuff, but a lot of just people time. Meals are really important, like everybody cooks something really good and really bad for you, and then get together and eat Southern meals, and just a lot of time together, like face to face with people. And so I was super blessed to have parents and grandparents that raised their families that way, that just cherished time together and lived lives of faith. So I was seeing over the generations just a life of faith. A lot of times people, y'all, will come to me and say things like, man, you just do good work or something. And it's nice and very humbling, but for me, like, I don't see myself as that at all. I see myself as I'm just my parents' kid, and they prayed before they ate, so I pray before I eat. It's just the way that I was raised. I don't see myself as like this like super Christian, like family devotionals all the time. I don't think my parents and I ever have had a devotional time together, but I just saw them live a life of faith and saw them act it out rather than just like read about it. And so because I saw it and because my brother saw it, now here we are in our own church, just doing our thing and living our own life of faith. We're going to get back some to my family in a little bit, but let's go to Moses' family. This is Exodus chapter 2. I'm going to backtrack and give you just a brief rundown of Exodus 1 and what was going on in the world at this time so we can kind of catch up. What had happened was there was this chosen nation called Israel that God loved and God cherished, and that was like his chosen people. And a famine broke out in their area, and so all of the Israelites had to go to Egypt, where they had stored up all this food to get food. And they ended up having to sell their possessions, their animals, their homes, and then themselves to the Egyptians. So they became enslaved to the Egyptian people just so that they could eat and survive. So time passed and generations passed where the Egyptians just had the Israelites in complete slavery. But something happened. The Israelites started having, I guess, more babies than the Egyptians or something. And they were outnumbering the Egyptians, and the Egyptians were like, we can't have this, like they're going to run us over if they keep multiplying, and we got to stop this. So the Pharaoh, the king, he put out like an edict, a rule that said, if a baby boy is born, then you have to kill him. And the midwives, the Israelite midwives, were not wanting to do that. They trusted God, and so they didn't kill the baby boys. And the king found out about it, and the midwives were like, those Israelite women, they just like pop them out before we can get there. It's not our fault. And so the midwives ended up not kind of getting off the hook. But the king was like, we're going to come through this whole area and kill all of the baby boys who were just born. And so Moses' mother had just had him. So that's where we're going to pick up here. Now a man of the house of Levi, that's Amram, married a Levite woman, Jochebed, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. That's Moses. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put him among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe. That's Miriam. She's coming up soon. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered. And the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. So, recap. Moses is getting too old, and I guess he's crying and noisy, and so they can't hide him in their home. So they put him in a basket and put him in the reeds of the Nile River. And Moses' older sister, who's probably about 7 at the time, Miriam, is just like standing back watching what's going to happen to her little baby brother in this basket. And Pharaoh's daughter comes down, knows that it's an Israelite baby boy, and Miriam shows up as a little 7-year-old and says, well, would you like me to go get an Israelite woman to nurse the baby for you? And then ends up taking baby Moses to his mother to be nursed, which was probably till he was somewhere between the ages of 2 and 5, because they nursed for like a long time back then. So Moses ended up staying with his mom and being paid for it for the first few years of his life. So I look at that and I'm like, well, what kind of does it require for you to just stick your kid in a basket? Like, what kind of faith is that? And just after researching, if the Pharaoh had found out that they were hiding Moses, then probably both parents would be killed, because they just didn't have a value for the Israelites' life, and they would have just probably killed him. So Moses' parents made a sacrifice, were selfless, and said, we're going to hide our baby boy and trust God because we see something unique in him. In both this book and in Hebrews, it talks about how Moses was not an ordinary baby. And I'm just going to throw this out there, but probably when you all had babies, you were like, oh my gosh, this is the cutest one ever. Like, maybe not immediately, but like after like the first hour, then you were like, this is like the most beautiful baby I've ever seen. And Moses' parents were like that. They were like, this is no ordinary child. He had good skin. He was a beautiful child. And so they said, we want to keep him alive. We value this baby. God's given him to us, and we want to protect and treasure his life. So they took the act of putting him in the basket with risking their own lives to possibly save the life of their son. So we look at that, and it's like, we aren't probably at risk of people coming and taking our kids away or anything, but there are a lot of lessons, I think, that we can learn from Moses' life that might apply to our lives. Something that I noticed was their faith, just from Hebrews saying, by faith. I'm like, well, where was the faith? And the faith was them putting him in a basket and just being hands-off and trusting God. How that might apply to us today. This is like the parenting advice part, so if I ever have kids someday, you can come and fuss at me if it's wrong. I think a lot of us like try to protect kids and keep them home and like never let anybody get them, but I think there's a time when we just trust God with our kids and say, I am going to send them to kid camp after all, and trust those chaperones to take care of them, and trust God to watch over my kids. I know some of you parents are scared to send your kids to camp. So there are times when it's time for us to just trust God with our kids and just say, God, you'll protect them. This is your child more than it's mine, and it's time for you to take him on. Another thing that I saw about the life of Moses was probably a blessing. we see unique things in our kids. I see unique things in the kids and the teenagers here. And I think we need to tell them that. Like, we need to say, hey, you know what? I noticed that you are really serving God well today. I noticed that you're being kind. I noticed that you are being someone who cares about other people. And I think that Moses' parents saw that he was not an ordinary child. And I'm sure when Moses was nursing him for those first few years of life, she was probably speaking over him, like, you are God's child. You are a child that's strong. You're going to grow up and do great things. And she's speaking these words over her kid. And, like, I can tell your kids kind things, but when it comes from you all as parents, like, it makes so much difference. And I still remember now things that my parents said about me and said to me when I was a little kid. And if they say something, it's like sticking it on you permanently. And so if they tell me, wow, you're a leader, you can go and lead something, then I'm like, I'm a leader. Because if they told me, then it's true, right? So, I think we need to do that with our kids. We need to show faith. We need to bless them and tell them who they are. I think there's a part of teaching that needs to happen and probably happened with the first few years of Moses' life. Moses was raised first by his mom and his dad, and then he was put into the Pharaoh's house and dressed like an Egyptian, taken care of like an Egyptian, and he could have very well taken on the Egyptian identity of the current world that day. But he chose to be mistreated as an Israelite. He could have said, I'm going to be like the Egyptians, because he was living in the Egyptian house, but he constantly held on to his identity as someone who was a follower of God. And I think that he probably got that from knowing his skin was different, knowing what his mom taught him, and he was just a little guy. And so as he grew older, he said, no, I'm an Israelite. This is who I am. I'm God's child, and I'm going to be a God follower. And I think that's something else we can kind of apply to our lives. If we've been told as a kid, like, this is a family that follows God, we're raising you in a home that follows God, then our kids will end up in that path. And then some characteristics that I saw of Moses' parents that I thought were neat were a lack of fear. It says in Hebrews that because they didn't fear the king. And there are so many people that we fear, like principals, teachers, coaches, like people in our kids' lives that we just want to fear and we want to protect them from, rather than just like sending our kids in there. This is a teachable moment from my dad. As a kid, like if we were having trouble with a teacher or a coach or a friend or something, and we would go to our parents and be like, will you help us? Or I don't know what you say when you're like 7 or 12 and you're just needing help and you want your parents to just come and bail you out. My dad would be like sitting in the living room and we would approach him and he would say, go get that book off the shelf, like this one book on this bookshelf. And we had to do this all the time. My brother's laughing because he knows. And it was like such a pain because you go to your dad and you're like, Dad, help me, I'm your kid. And he's like, go get that book off the shelf. And so we go and we get this book and what's it called? Road Less Traveled. And you open it he was like, open it to the first page. And so you open it to the first page and he says, read the first sentence. Like he's done this to both of us like numerous times. And so we have to read the first sentence out loud and it said, life is difficult. And he would be like, I'm sorry. So, and that was it. Like, then we like close the book and put it back and he would be like, good luck out there. I mean, like, and he was very clear. Like, Jesus told us you're going to have trouble in the world. And so start figuring out how to deal with it. I mean, my parents helped us, but then a lot of their helping was just like, good luck out there, kid. Like, go get them. And so I think that there was some teaching that happened there, but then there was a lack of fear. I was continually scared of authority growing up, and my dad was like bound and determined to make sure that I wasn't scared of people and wasn't scared of messing up. I never wanted to mess up because I didn't want my teacher upset with me, and like I was that little girl in elementary, middle school, not high school. But my dad was like, we're going to solve this problem. And he was like, yeah, I'm going to start asking you how many mistakes you make every day. And he wanted me to make mistakes, and he started paying me to make mistakes. So, like, this is an example. Like, basketball season. I was, like, really aggressive in practice, and I was a point guard and would play through middle school basketball and, like, really into it. And he would come and watch practices, and I was, like, doing my thing. And then a game would come, and a referee would step out on the court, and I was, like, scared stiff to get a foul. Like, I did not want to foul anybody. So I was never aggressive, and I was never going after it. And my dad was yelling on the sideline, like, get him, So I went home, and he was like, listen, I'm going to start paying you to foul out of games. So he was like, you got to go in there and you got to be aggressive, and I'm going to pay you $5 for every time you foul. So like the next game, like I fouled out because I was like, that's $25. So I was like going after it, and he got me over that fear. High school, he was like telling me that I just needed to push the limits and like just be myself, and like you don't need to be fearful. Like you need to stop being scared and stop being shy, and you need to mess up. I brought home my first detention notice, and he like framed it on the fridge. Like, my daughter is not scared anymore. And so after that, I stopped getting paid for mistakes. But he knew me and knew that I was scared, and he said, I'm gonna change this. We are a family that's not scared. I'm gonna make sure you're not scared either. Selflessness and sacrifice, we saw that through Moses' parents, and I grew up with selflessness and sacrifice being shown to me by my parents. A certain child of my parents, that would be me, got in really, really big trouble after we went to this like huge theme park. It was like Busch Gardens or something, where you pay all sorts of money. Family didn't have a lot of money when I was really little. I was probably like 6 or 7. And we walk into the park, paid the money, walked in, and I must have talked back or something. And my dad was like, that's it, we're leaving. And we just paid all this money. And he said, nope, we're going home. I'm not going to be out in public with you like this. And of course my mom was like, you're ruining our day. Like, we have the rest of the day. We want to like go and play as a family. So we went back to the hotel for the day because of me. And my parents were continually sacrificing like their fun that they could have and their enjoyment that they could have to raise me and my brother. Just making sure that that was priority, that we're going to teach these lessons when kids are little, because discipline when you're like age 0 to age like 7 helps a lot. But then if you just start to discipline your kids when they're in high school, then it's kind of a problem. This is parenting advice, and I'm sorry I'm giving it, but I just have observed sometimes when parents are starting to discipline their kids like when they're in high school, then it's just curbing behavior. It's like taking away their phone, but they're going to have a phone after high school, and they're going to have it in college, and they need to learn to live a life out in the open without parents just like deadbolting the kids' door and locking them away from the rest of the world. So kind of seeing all these things happen with Moses' family and my family, just a life of faith, sacrifice, selflessness, not lack of faith, lack of fear, living a life of faith, and then just blessings from my family. I saw that in my family, in Moses' family. It kind of makes me wonder what we're passing down to our kids. And I'm going to say our like church kids. Like, y'all have your own specific kids, some of you, and then we have these kids and teenagers that we're ministering to. Some of them whose parents don't come to church. So in a sense, just us as the body, we're their parents. We're the ones to bless them, to care for them, to show them examples of selflessness or of sacrifice. And so it makes me wonder, like, what we're passing down. So I want you to kind of think, this is kind of a challenge a little bit, because I know that some of us are in difficult spots. It's hard for me to think about because I've seen all 4 of my grandparents die. I've seen my mom die, and I know that this is a hard thing because some of us have had parents that we've lost, or kids that we've lost, or we haven't been able to have kids. There's just I'm aware that there's a lot of pain around this topic, but I want for us to think about what we've been passed down from our families, both good and bad, and what we would like to pass down. If we have kids or if we don't have kids, what do you want to pass down to the people who are younger than you in your life and in this church? I've seen specific examples of anger be passed down in this church from parents to kids. I'll see sometime some kid at youth group just like get really mad about something, and then the next week the parent will call about a totally separate thing, but just really mad. And I'll see that, oh wow, there's anger in that home. That kid is probably angry because the parents are probably angry, and probably because their parents were angry. So what are we passing down? I've seen examples of opposite things too, like service, where a kid is just like has a heart of service. This one I'll use a name for. The Curry family, both Jeannie and Dwayne Curry have hearts for the Lord and hearts to serve. I'll see Jeannie like doing stuff around here that nobody else wants to do and just serving well. And her son Keegan, he's going to be a senior in high school this year, is always serving, always taking the step, hey, what can we do? Like literally, I know he's in Mexico. Maybe they're watching in Mexico. He the other day said to me, all right, like, do you just know of anything that I could do around here? which is like, I think a parent's like dream probably. So for me, it's my dream. I'm like, actually, there are so many things you could do around here, you know? And he just wants to help out and wants to serve. And I think he's inherited that from his parents. So think about what you've been passed down, what's been passed on to you, and what would you like to pass down. I'll end with kind of what I've been passed down from my family. I've received, I think, grace and diplomacy from my mom. I watched her fight a battle with cancer, and I watched her die. And that process, I saw her go from this life to the next life, like in complete peace. And in her Bible, she had written, physical death should be of no concern to a believer. And I saw her live that. There's a difference in like memorizing scripture and memorizing things and doing it. If you all as parents were like, Joe, you need to go clean your room to your kid. And then Joe like left for a couple hours and came back and was like, Mom, I memorized what you said. Like, I memorized it and I can quote it, and you told me to go clean my room. Like, you would not be proud of your kid at all. And like if they're like, okay, I'll try again. And then they went away and they were like, Mom, I got 5 other kids together and we all sat around and studied about what it would look like if we cleaned our room. And you like said like it would look really awesome, and we're gonna have a 5-week study on what it would look like if we cleaned our room. Like, you probably would not care at all that your kid did that, and they'd probably be in trouble. But like if they're taught to live things by you, then they're going to live things out rather than just sit in church and read stuff. And you as parents, you're in a dangerous place. If you're bringing your kids to church and you're not living it at home, then your kids are seeing that, and they know that you're not living it. And so the result is then they're going to raise their kids the same way. They're going to take them to church, but then not go and live it on their own. So I think we have kind of a dangerous role to play with that. So going back, I learned those things from my mom. Even though she has died, I think I still am learning things from her. How? Just in the last few months, I feel like I've learned just what does it look like to just like be kind and just let things be. What does patience actually look like? Not like, I'm going to be patient for 5 minutes and then my patience is done. Like real patience for just a long period of time. What does that look like with people? What does it look like to just constantly extend grace? I learned a lot from my dad about who God is, like who he is and his character. There was a time, I guess like in raising us as kids, we could kind of just do what we wanted, I'm going to say. There weren't really any rules. As a little kid, there were tons of rules, so we just learned to respect our parents. But after we got to be like 9, 10 years old, there was never any grounding. There was never any curfew. And some of you parents are like, I bet you were crazy. But we weren't crazy. We just respected our parents and came home, and we made some mistakes, but we learned mistakes with our parents around to help us talk through them. And there was a certain weekend in high school when I just got my license, and I was like, I just got in my car and went to a friend's house and did stuff from Friday after school till Sunday night. And I called my dad. I was like, I'm going to come home, because by this time I'm like, I really should shower at my own house with my own clothes and start life again for Monday. So I go back home Sunday night, and I'm like, he is going to be livid. Like, I'm just mentally preparing myself. So I go home as late as possible, hoping he's like in bed or tired. And I walk in the door, he's standing in the kitchen, and he just walks up to me and hugs me and tells me to have a good night. And I like went up to my room like, what just happened? Like, I'm totally scared that, like, did I miss the memo? Like, what on earth? But I saw grace from my dad. And so from that, when people talked about grace in church, I was like, oh, God gives us grace? Like, that's what it feels like. Because I saw that lived out in my home, and I knew what it was like. Teachable moments are my dad's best and worst thing, probably. My brother's laughing like through this whole talk. My dad makes anything a teachable moment. Like, I painted my nails the other day. It's like 11 o'clock at night. I'm at his house. I paint my nails. And I was talking about, like, what terrible quality the nail polish is. And he starts going off about, like, well, sometimes if you sacrifice such and such, then you aren't going to get this. And he's, like, making nail polish a teachable moment. And I was like, Dad, like, it's 11 o'clock at night, and, like, I understand economics and, like, supply and demand. I mean, he is, like, all the way there, like, teaching lessons about how the world works. And, like, I do that sometimes now because that's what I was exposed to. There was never in my 18 years in my home an opportunity lost for us to learn something. Like, if you didn't take the trash out, it wasn't like you didn't take the trash out. It was like, how are you disrespecting your mother through this? And then we feel awful, but we learned the lesson. So I learned a lot from my parents, and they passed down good things to me, and I hope to do that if I have kids, and I hope you all can do that. But something that I think is super cool, my grandparents, after they died, I received certain things from them. And my grandfather, I received a desk, which was awesome. It's like a desk that he wrote his sermons at. And so I saw him as a pastor, saw him preach, and knew who he was. This is a plaque that was like in the desk in the drawer. It says, "To our beloved pastor and family, in appreciation of 9.5 years as God's servant. First Baptist Church, Hillsdale, Michigan, 1960 to 1969. So, like, I have this to remember what he did as a servant. And this is, like, 1969. He lived a long time after that as a pastor, preaching, and I saw him in my own life doing that. One of his last sermons that he preached, I'm going to tell this story and then I'm done. He was up at the front of the church speaking at a pulpit, because, like, back in other places, there's, like, a thing, the pulpit. He's talking, and during the middle of his sermon, he has a stroke and falls to the ground, and they call EMS, an ambulance comes. He's lying there. He kind of, like, comes conscious. They're checking his vitals and everything. EMS people are there, and the congregation is, like, sitting there. I mean, like, what would y'all do if I just went down right now? It would be like that, and you just don't know what to do. People are praying. The EMS guys get there, and they, at this time, have got him, like, seated on the stage. And the EMS guys have the stretcher, and they're ready to lay him on the stretcher to leave. And my grandfather said, "Fellas, I got about 15 more minutes. You're going to have a seat." And he finishes that sermon that day. And looking back, I know it's because if he died, like, he wanted to die preaching. Like, he wanted to be doing what God called him to do. And for me, like, that's my heart. Like, if I die, like, I want for me to be doing what God asked me to do. But I wouldn't feel that way or be that way if I hadn't seen generations live that way, like, completely live that way. Something I inherited from my grandmother is this Bible. That's my papa I was talking about. This is my Gram's Bible. She had a lot of them, but this is one that she used for several years. And as a pastor's wife, she sat and listened to lots and lots of sermons. And whenever there was a sermon, she would open her Bible up, and I guess she's, like, listening to the sermon. And there, I mean, like, it's almost like every page is written on in here. And it says the date that her husband preached that sermon on that page. So I was like, I wonder if my papa ever preached on this one silly little verse that I was like, can't I get another verse in Hebrews? There's so many cool verses in here. But I looked in here, and sure enough, Truman Cochran preached in Robards, Kentucky, Robards Missionary Baptist Church, on July 13th in 1980 at the evening service. He preached on the same verse from today. And I was like, what a cool thing that my grandfather has preached on this verse, and now I'm preaching on it. Like, I wish I could just call him and be like, "Papa, this is going on." And there was, like, a whole bunch of other writing in here, and it took me a while to figure out what it was. I guess I got my bad handwriting from my family too. But it said, "Kids left tonight," and she listed off the names of all of her kids and the cities that they were going to. And so I guess all of her kids were in town that day, the day that my grandfather was preaching on parenting, which I think is so cool that he's still, after they were raised and they had kids of their own, he was preaching on parenting and living a life where he knew, I have a legacy, I'm giving my kids something, and I want them to take their faith to the grave. He wanted to take his faith to the grave, and he wanted them to have that too. Which I thought was so neat. I hope he's, like, watching right now in heaven, and he can be like, way to go, like, looking at that. So it's just good. Let's just think about kind of what we're passing down and what that looks like. Something that was kind of haunting to me as I was going through this is just knowing that there are parents in this church who don't have faith on their own. And I was like, man, like, how can kids learn faith if their parents don't have faith? And so, oh, y'all are sniffling. I'm sorry. I'm fine. I think that we need to start with ourselves. Start with your home, with your marriage. Don't just be telling your kids all the time, you need to go follow God. Like, just start with yourself and start with following God. And your kids will pick up on it. I don't think my dad ever taught me a certain Bible verse, but he lived the whole thing. And so I learned a lot just from watching that, and your kids can learn it too. To close, I keep saying to close. I am going to close this time. To close, I think it's important we remember something in John chapter 6. It says that the Spirit is the one who gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. We're just here taking care of God's kids. Ultimately, it's not our ultimate responsibility to raise these kids. They're God's kids. They're not ours. I think we need to pray for them, and we need to set an environment in our homes for God to do his work. But we aren't the ones who are supposed to be the Spirit and the convictor and the punisher and everything in our kids' lives. I think that's up for God to do.